All right, we were happy to have on another man. You used to go to the Scout Days with me, Ryan Burns, an original. He covers the Gophers for Gopher Illustrated. How are you, man? Good to see you.
I'm well excited to fly into Willard Airport. Never done that before. I've only driven before. So we're going to see what that Chicago to Champaign aircraft is like. I'm thinking a crop duster, one by one, but it'll be a very interesting next 36, 48 hours for you and I.
Yeah, before the season, listen, I thought Illinois against Minnesota was a favorable matchup, and it still may be. Illinois is the ranked team coming into this one, and Brett Bielema's simply had PJ Fleck's number, and Minnesota's number 10-0 against Minnesota, 3-0 here at Illinois. But Minnesota's playing some good ball here after a struggle of a start, 2-3. I think 0-3 against Power 4 opponents. So what's been going well the last 3 weeks here, Ryan?
Yeah, it's been an interesting season for this Gopher team where they lose their opener to North Carolina, the sloppiest game of the PJ Fleck era, offense, defense, special teams. You missed 2 kicks, including a game winner from about 40 yards. Your all Big Ten kicker and Dragan Kesich has been off essentially the entire year. You don't exactly play well against Iowa. Then you head into that USC game, which at the time, USC is the number 11 team in the country. You've lost 6 straight Big Ten games, 7 straight Power 4 games. I'm spending the whole week trying to tell people Minnesota doesn't have $26 million to fire PJ Fleck in the budget and also have $22 million to pay the players here in a very short amount of time. And then what does Minnesota do? They go off and rattle off 3 straight wins, including the UCLA game, USC, and then here most recently against Maryland. So it's been a very interesting season for Minnesota. I think the biggest thing coming in is, this is one of the coin flip games that I thought coming into the year, just like you did. I think Vegas has reflected that, where the Illini open as a 3-point favorite. It's interesting that a 6-point swing has now occurred, where the Gophers are now up by 3. Again, we'll get into injury talk here. You would know better than I. But this is one of those games where Minnesota hasn't been able to get over the hump because Minnesota was in this exact same spot last year. They were 5-3 heading into November, taking on the Fighting Illini. And then we have the 85-yard drive with the backup quarterback bit, and it just goes pear-shaped from there. Minnesota finishes 5-7. So they've been playing really good football coming into this, especially offensively with their quarterback, Max Brosmer. I understand that they haven't faced the best pass defenses in the Big Ten. I'd argue they won't again this weekend, but they have been playing really efficiently. They haven't been turning the ball over, and they've been taking the ball away, which in college football, if you can do those 2 things, you're going to have a shot in a lot of games.
PJ Fleck has built a program that I respect. Whether you like everything that goes along with PJ and how he talks and all that, he's built a very good program there. You mentioned it, like early in the year, people are sitting there looking up his buyout and discussing that on your message board. Just where are we at with PJ Fleck? Because it feels like it's almost maybe it could be taken for granted up there, just what he's done at that program. I know Jerry Kill had success too before him, but just where are they at right now with PJ Fleck and leading that program that's just been consistently solid?
Yeah, Fleck is now 55-37 here at Minnesota, and that's where he is tied for 4th in program history with 32 Big Ten wins. He's 5th overall in overall wins. He's coached 92 games. His 598 win percentage is 3rd best amount among coaches with at least 45 games under their belt. So, like I have, essentially for our entire lifetimes, Minnesota has been incredibly mediocre at football. They've had some up years, so they've had some down years, but essentially they've been somewhere between, on average, before PJ took over, 4-8, 6-6. There were some good Glenn Mason years. There were some good Jerry Kill years. But the way that Fleck has elevated the floor now, it's not always perfect, and that's where this season is a prime example of that. If Minnesota just doesn't flum or just screw up that opening game, they'd also be 6-2 right now, and we'd be talking maybe a little bit about a different game. But the way it gets done isn't always linear. It's very much a roller coaster, but this team has been able to figure it out. And I think that's the thing with Fleck is it's a very different style. And the number one question I get is PJ always like this? And my answer to that is yes. He's always 5 Red Bulls all the time, whether the camera is on, camera's off. I understand that's very off-putting. Some people think it's disingenuous. That's just who he is. It is like I would have seen it now by 8 years between all the interactions that people like you and I have
Yeah,
throughout the year, whether it's recruiting camps, whether it's spring ball, you would have seen it by now. It just is who he is, and I get it's off-putting, but
it works for him.
it does, and that you can't argue with the results, especially at a program like Minnesota, which I think is a bottom 3 job potentially in the Big Ten. I think there's probably not a worse recruiting base outside of Oregon in a 300-mile radius around them. And Oregon, like you and I both know, can go out and buy anybody they want because they got Phil Knight money. So what he's been able to do to elevate the floor of this program, now I'd argue a lot more people want to see a little bit more ceiling. There's been a copious amounts of opportunities throughout the last 5 years back when there were divisions for Minnesota to win the West.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't able to. But I think largely, especially it helps when you're riding a 3-game winning streak. I think Fleck's done a lot of good for this program.
Yeah, and there's always a careful what you wish for once you're trying
Correct.
to chase that ceiling. All right, so Max Brosmer has been a huge upgrade for Minnesota at quarterback, which obviously was an issue last year. Calic Manis goes to Rutgers. Rutgers still has quarterback issues and some other issues as well. But what has Brosmer brought to that program, particularly, it seems like over the last 3 or 4 games?
Yeah, he's been incredibly dependent, and that's where last year the quarterback play was very sporadic. You saw it in a game like this where Athan went, I believe, 11 of 22. Gopher quarterbacks just against Brett Bielema and that defense the last 3 years have been horrible. I don't know if there's a better way to put it. They're completing 47% of their passes the last 3 years with more turnovers than touchdowns, averaging like 135 yards per game. I mean, that's not going to win you many games at all. And that's where Max Brosmer in the month of October, 9 touchdowns, no turnovers, 75% completion percentage. He's currently sitting at 69 for the season, which if he continues on a pace like that, he's going to obliterate Minnesota's single season passing record in terms of completion percentage. The thing that separates Max from other quarterbacks I've watched is his processing ability. I think of the number of touchdowns in the last couple of games where it's not the first or even the second read that gets the ball. It's the third, and even against UCLA, Minnesota scores with 27 seconds left to win the game. That's the 5th read in the progression. I mean, I haven't seen a Gopher quarterback get off his first read, let alone get to a second read in a long time. Gopher quarterback play has not been very good. And so when they were able to get Brosmer out of the portal from New Hampshire, all the questions were, what's it going to be like going from the CAA to the Big Ten? And there was a little bit of an adjustment period early on, but the way that he and the offensive coordinator, Greg Harbaugh, are really meshing right now it's a lot of fun to watch. And he's not putting the ball in harm's way, which why is Minnesota 3-0 in their last 3 games? They're killing people in the take give. Their quarterback isn't putting the ball in harm's way. He's making the accurate throws. He's getting through his progressions. And if you can get multiple touchdowns in your 3rd or 4th or even 5th progression, like I do, for a college football quarterback, that's pretty dang good.
All right, so what's you got around him? Because we think of Minnesota and under PJ Fleck, and it's been these big physical offensive lines and rushing attacks with maybe a play action that goes along with it. So what are we seeing from this offense that might be a little different this year?
It's been interesting because Minnesota's offense, when it hasn't been clicking, when they score 10 points or go a half scoring 0-3, it's been self-inflicted wounds, and that starts up front. Their offensive line, for whatever the reason, has been very inconsistent at times. Now, they've only allowed 4 sacks in the last 3 games, which they are a much better pass protection line than they are in run blocking. And that's been the story of the whole year. Is I thought that the offensive line, which features a left tackle, an Ariante Ursary, who's going to be a top 45 overall selection in the next NFL draft. You have a right tackle in Quinn Carroll, who's in his 3rd year of starting. You have another multi-year starter on the interior. They should be good in terms of run blocking. They should be consistent, but they're not. They've had 17 penalties as a unit, which if you just get backed up as a college football offense in 1st and 15, 2nd and 20, like I do, it's a death sentence for a lot of people. Or even with drops. Max Brosmer throws a very good ball. Minnesota, going into last week's game, was 2nd in the Big Ten in drops. So if they can get out of their own way, that's where they've been pretty good. And if they are getting out of their own way, Daniel Jackson, who I saw earlier this week, Aaron Henry called the most underrated receiver in the country, which preceded to me then asked Daniel Jackson, did you see Aaron Henry's comment? And he said, yeah, it's cool, but what is he supposed to say? Like, call me bad?
Yeah.
It's got to go in one ear, out the other. And I appreciated that honesty from Daniel Jackson, who He's third in the Big Ten in receptions. He's not the biggest guy. He's not the fastest guy. He is someone that can create separation. And I know Isaiah Williams killed Minnesota last year, and I know they're probably similar in size, but Isaiah, I think, is much more athletically gifted than Daniel is, but Daniel just wins out of his routes. He's consistently making catches where you see him get out of his break and there's 4 or 5 yards of separation. And Brosmer is going to look to him early and often. Their tailback, Darius Taylor, you look at the stats overall, and I think last week's game is a perfect indication of it. You look at the end of the game, and Darius Taylor is averaging about 5 yards per carry. And you're thinking, okay, Minnesota ran the ball well. No, they really didn't, especially with Darius. They had one carry go for 51 yards and a touchdown. The other 14 carries went for 2 yards per carry. It's been very boom or bust in the run game. But Darius, how they've been using him is through the pass game. No Big Ten running back has caught more passes than Darius Taylor. He's got 34 of them. That's second best among Power 4 running backs. So this offense is really going to roll through those two guys. They've got some ancillary pieces like Elijah Spencer, who's really stepped up here in the last couple of games, 3 touchdowns. Jamison Gears, an Illinois native from the Chicago area there. But it's going to be Daniel Jackson. It's going to be check downs and design things to Darius Taylor as well. Those are their two guys that really stir the drink.
Yeah, I find this matchup interesting because Illinois has kind of been this bend but don't break, force them into long drives. And Minnesota kind of thrives on those long drives. They had 3 passes over 30-plus yards this year. Like, they do have a couple long runs with Taylor, so Illinois is going to have to tackle him well. But this isn't a very explosive offense, so it's kind of like, which one survives here? Is it the offense that puts together long drives and is very efficient that way, or is it the defense that's trying to force those long drives?
Well, I think third down is going to be a huge part of this game, where the Illini defense, hasn't been great on third down. And that's where Minnesota has gone from one of the worst third down offenses in the country a year ago. They were 106th, 107th in the country. To this year, they're 4th best in the Big Ten, 17th best in the entire country. They're converting third downs at a 47% clip. Illinois has been struggling against Big Ten opponents to get off the field. And if you allow Minnesota to be in third and short to third and manageable, Brosmer has shown that he can create and find the read that's going to be open there. So it's going to be very interesting to see, because if you can put any college football offense at third and long, Minnesota's going to struggle, just like Illinois will. But if Minnesota can continue to get to third and manageable, and I think Illinois has struggled, at least statistically, to get there, I think it could be an interesting matchup in that regard.
We kind of all dive into these PFF numbers nowadays, Ryan, and you see these quarterbacks, every one of them is worse under pressure.
Correct.
But Brosmer hasn't faced a lot of pressure. There's not many snaps he has been. The deep ball has not been great for him. So have teams been able to blitz him? Like, how have they handled that? Because, as you said, they are a good pass blocking unit.
Yeah, it's been interesting because the offensive line struggles with stunts and twists. They have for essentially every year of the offensive line coach and Brian Callahan. Minnesota's offensive line, I would call, they're athletic at spots, specifically at left tackle. I think their center, Greg Johnson, is pretty athletic, but they're more so mass and just kind of big bodies, which is, again, you give them smaller, twitchier guys, stunts and twists are going to give them problems. And they've really cleaned up a lot of the issues in that regard. Now, Max Brosmer, coming out of New Hampshire last year, was actually the best quarterback in the FCS against pressure and against the blitz, where when you look at the PFF numbers now, he just doesn't get flustered very often. He is navigating around pressure. There's still pressure in his face, which we saw that last week, but he knows how to slide around the pocket, not take sacks. The thing to watch, if the Illini are able to get him off track, you need to get A and B gap pressure right in his face. Because if he sees it coming, he's just going to tuck the ball and take the sack. He's not going to try to make some heroic throw. So if they can get internal pressure specifically, that's where we saw against Michigan and Iowa. That's where you can get Brosmer off track.
All right, let's talk about this defense. New coordinator with Joe Rossi at another Big Ten school now. So, what do we think of the unit that's right now number 12 in the country in scoring defense and number 1 among Power 4 teams in interceptions? What stood out about the new coordinator and how they've kind of adapted to him?
Well, they can force turnovers, let me tell you. It's been very interesting to watch them go from Joe Rossi, who's now the Michigan State defensive coordinator, which was very much a very sound, very laid back, very, we're going to keep everything in front of us, play zone coverage, not blitz, to Corey Heatherman, who is very helter-skelter chaos. It is very simulated pressure based. It is very overload based. It is we're trying to change the picture from pre-snap versus post-snap to give the offensive line fits, which then hopefully gives us a free runner on the quarterback, which can lead to interceptions. And that's where Minnesota leads the Big Ten in interceptions. They lead the Big Ten in takeaways. And that's where it's fascinating. It's a great case study on, if you look at the sack numbers specifically, Minnesota is, I think, a bottom 6 team in the Big Ten in sacks, but they're a top 20 team in college football in pressure. And that's where pressure, I think, is always more valuable than sacks. It all gets the same job done. But it's been very up and down. When the ups are there and it's very up and up, you're seeing turnovers galore. And then there'll be a drive where there's never a third down and the opposing offense goes and scores. So Minnesota's been playing a lot better in that regard. I would tell you this, they are going to do everything they can to get pressure on Luke Altmaier. And like I do, he's very adept with his legs. I think he's run for 168 yards the last 3 weeks, 9 first downs with his legs since the bye. That's been a big focus for them this week, trying to keep Altmaier contained in the pocket. They have faced some mobile quarterbacks. They've struggled with that at times. But I'm going to be very interested to see, because 3 interceptions on the year for Altmaier, but then you look at PFF's turnover-worthy plays, and I think he's second highest among Big Ten quarterbacks there. So is it going to be regression back? Is Luke Altmaier still going to be able to do a lot of things? But I'll say this, there is a tremendous amount of respect for the Illini offensive coordinator, Barry Lunny Jr. Illinois has scored on their opening possession a touchdown in each of the last 3 games. Minnesota is well aware of that. They're also well aware that in these last 3 games, the Illini quarterbacks, which I'll remind you, Brandon Peters, touchdown Tommy DeVito, Luke Altmaier, and John Paddock, have combined to complete 77% of their passes with 7 total touchdowns and 2 turnovers. Like, you remember back to the Minnesota quarterback stats, 47% completion percentage, more turnovers than touchdowns. On the flip side, Illini quarterbacks against PJ Fleck have played like Heisman contenders. Yeah. So which quarterback plays well in this game is going to be fascinating to watch, but Minnesota is going to do everything they can. If they can get Luke Altmaier and Barry Lunny in these 3rd and 5+ situations, they have been thriving all year, which is why the true freshman Coy Parrish leads the Big Ten. He's just been sitting there over the top reading eyes, and if there's an errant throw, he can go get it.
Yeah, he's a really impressive top 100 prospect that is living up to that billing. Really good punt returner as well. I am fascinated by that because Illinois has kind of used some aggression here recently and trying to keep Altmaier in the pocket with some draws. Luke Altmaier designed runs, so I'm interested to see how that happens. But you talk about blitzes and stunts and being aggressive. That concerns me for an Illinois offensive line that has struggled with that kind of communication. Mm-hmm. It feels like a Minnesota defensive front that, Joyner's a good player. Their linebacker's a good player, but not like overwhelming, right? But this secondary is legit. So I'm really interested to see if Pat Bryant is healthy, Zachary Franklin, 2 good receivers plus Altmaier. That's a fun matchup to watch. This Illini passing game against that secondary.
Absolutely. And that's where, the stats like I do. No Big Ten quarterback has been under more pressure than Luke Altmaier. No Big Ten quarterback has been sacked more than Luke Altmaier. But that's also where Minnesota, the way that they play, you're going to have one-on-one opportunities on the outside. And that's where their 2 outside corners, Justin Wally is second in the Big Ten in PBUs, just hit a pick 6 last week. Ethan Robinson has played well. Their safety group has been the surprise of the entire season. I came into the season thinking that was going to be their biggest question mark. Tyler Nubin, the St. Charles native, was a 2nd-round draft pick in the New York Football Giants. Their strong safety spot was not very good last year. And what they've been able to find with kind of a trio of underclassmen with Coy Parrish, Kerry Brown, and Aiden Gooseby has been a revelation on the back end. They've been sure tacklers. They've been taking away the football. So with the way Minnesota plays, to your point, Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin versus Justin Wally and Ethan Robinson on the outside, and then we'll see if they can mix in the tight ends across the middle. I think it's going to be a fascinating thing. Greg Harbaugh on Minnesota's offensive side versus Barry Lunny Jr. We're going to see, I think, some good schemes coming offensively on this one.
All right, we're going to find out more about Illinois' injury situation. Brett Bielema was meeting with the media about an hour after we record this to hear the latest on Pat Bryant, the defensive backs. They sounded optimistic. But what's Minnesota's injury situation? Anything we should know about the special teams as well?
Yeah, injury-wise, Fleck doesn't talk about injuries. Like,
Yeah.
literally, we will ask him, hey, this guy left. We only get PJ Fleck once a week. We get him on Mondays. And well, hey, what's the deal here? And he'll look at you, give you a smirk on his face, like, your son in his Power Ranger costume, knowing that he's got a lot of candy in there. And you say, can I have a Kit Kat? And he gives you the smirk and he says, no. He'll always hit you with PJ will. You'll find out 2 hours ahead of time.
Yeah.
Now, their starting left guard, Tyler Cooper, left the game at halftime last week, did not return. That would be a loss for them. He's a multi-year starter there, Tyler Cooper. So we'll see if Minnesota ends up replacing him. The Fleck elected to keep his defensive starters in late into the fourth quarter last week, up 4 scores. And that's where Joyner got banged up. Aiden Gooseby, their starting safety, got banged up. We'll see if they're able to go. I anticipate they will. But special teams, I'm glad you mentioned it, because that's arguably the biggest difference, whether you want to look at Bill Conley from ESPN's SP Plus in special teams rating. I'm a big fan of K4 rating. Illini special teams are great. Minnesota's are not. I mean, I've referenced that Kelly Ford rating. They have the Illini special teams as the number 2 unit in the entire country. Minnesota's 129th. Like, it has.
And we talk about toss-up games. Yeah, when we talk about toss-up games and winning out margins, that's a possibility right there.
And that's where I think a lot of it comes down to, can Minnesota's kicker regain his form? He made both field goals last week. He was the Big Ten kicker of the year last year, but he's also missed 6 field goals already. Their punter is incredibly average in Mark Crawford. Their kick return game is a complete L. Coy Parrish can return punts if he gets blocking ahead of him. But I have lamented Gopher special teams for a long time. They switched special teams coordinators in the offseason, yet the issues remain, which that tells me PJ Fleck is not a great special teams coach. But that is going to be one area to watch. Is Illini special teams have been really good. Minnesota's have not. So something has to give. And that's where, if this game is as close as projected, which I think you and I both agree it will be, special teams might play a deciding factor in that.
Yeah, listen, this is a true toss-up game. And Illinois has been the beneficiary of winning most of those toss-up games. Their 2 losses are the top 3 ranked opponents right now. So this is a team deserving of being number 24, but there have been concerns defensively, especially the last couple of weeks. Luke Altmaier hasn't played his top tier as a passer the last couple of weeks. But what does this game mean for Minnesota? And how good are the vibes? Like, how real do you think this 3-game winning streak is?
I mean, the vibes are real good around here right now, especially coming off a performance where they played their most complete game of the season. That had been the whole thing, is they're up on Iowa at halftime, and then they play one of their worst halves of the season and end up losing by 3 touchdowns. You go up a touchdown to losing by 3 touchdowns, things went pear-shaped very, very quickly. We'd been screaming for, can you just put it together for 60 minutes? And they put it together for 45 last week, and the 45 was really good. They finally started strong. They're up 21-0 on Maryland at the end of the first quarter. Your offense is humming. You get a pick 6. The question is, can you do it consistently? I will die in the hill of this Gopher team can play with any team. It's just, when they have imploded hard. And now they finally have kind of gotten out of their own way a little bit more on this 3-game winning streak, where they started slow against UCLA. They're able to come back. USC, they play one of their most complete games of the season. There's still some lapses in there. And then last week, they played really well in the first 3 quarters there against Maryland, and then it's garbage time. So if they can just get out of their own way with self-inflicted wounds, and I'm talking offensively drop passes, offensive line penalties that set you back, I think they can win this game. But I would also tell you, Brett Bielema, you mentioned the stat, he's 10-0 against Minnesota for a reason. Whether it's at Wisconsin, whether it's at Illinois, you and I have watched a lot of these games where this Bielema offensive and defensive line have come out and punched Minnesota in the mouth. So if Minnesota is going to be able to escape Champaign with a win, the Gophers better be able to match Bart Miller's physicality.
All right, 3 straight wins for Illinois by combined 21 points. So these have been pretty dang close. What do you think the keys are for Minnesota to get victory here?
They got to get better quarterback play. I mean, I'm talking about Brosmer's been playing incredibly well, but Gopher quarterbacks against Brett Bielema's defenses have been very, very bad. Now, I understand a lot of that is you think about that 2022 game, or it's Devin Witherspoon and those defensive backs. Last year, it's Jerzon Newton coming in like a wrecking ball in the second half and just destroying them. But you have to be able to get good quarterback play. You can't be turning over the football. You have to continue to sustain drives. And that's where Brosmer's coming in on a heater. It's not against the greatest competition. I'm not going to disagree. But then I look at Illinois' pass defense. I think they're 15th in defensive pass efficiency in the Big Ten. They haven't been great as well. So if they can keep Brosmer upright, I think there's going to be opportunities for them to move the ball, especially with some of the defensive back injuries that may be coming into play. You'll find out here later today if that's a thing still. But I would also say you just got to win the turnover margin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that Minnesota found a way to lose a game last year in which they won the turnover margin just because of how crazy that final 3-play 85-yard drive was, which I'd still will go down and say was the worst call of the Joe Rossi Minnesota defensive era, asking a linebacker to carry Isaiah Williams 25 yards down the field. There's one receiver that can beat you. He's in the slot, and that's the call. I cannot get over that to this day. So quarterback play is going to be huge, and then defensively, you got to get Altmaier off his spot, and you can't let him beat you with his legs.
Ryan Burns, Gopher Illustrated. Check his stuff out there. You are the goods, man. I'll see you soon.
Go Twins.